Hi and good afternoon. Hope you're well. It's Chris Doughty from the SI Experience with our second webinar. I'm very excited today to be discussing tips, tricks, and inviting a very special guest who's one of our team. He is Mark Haines, and we're going to get his insight into a lot of aspects into his career. So we're very, very excited. So as always, with everybody on here, please join our Facebook groups. It's search for the SI family for weekly webinars, new products, offers, and more. So please don't forget to do that, or follow us and subscribe on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube for Sourcing Investments. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Mark in, and here's Mark. How you doing, Mark?
And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody who's on the line. Brilliant.
And as I say, for everybody, the uninitiated, this is Mark Haines, and Mark is, as I say, the experienced one. We'll use the word experienced in the team, and in his own right has very much been through the journey, and that many of you have gone through, are going through, and will go through as well. So thanks so much, Mark. And
good to be here.
So as with always, we've got some really interesting sort of aspects to ask you and some questions. And as I say, for everybody, please, on the webinar who's looking on anything, please ask your questions at any time. Any of your questions come up. So please ask any questions at all to Mark and myself for the Q&A, and we'll be here to respond. So, Mark, as we're building up, there's some eyes looking at us now. So I've got to ask you your first question. Who are you, and what do you do?
What do I do, and who am I? Well, yeah, Mark Haines, as you very rightly said. I'm married to Samantha, who's a maths tutor. We have one son who is now living in London and working for a Singaporean sovereign wealth fund, investing the Singapore government's money in European real estate. And I can tell you he's rushed off his feet at the moment. There is so much opportunity around, so much good buying opportunity in real estate in the UK and around Europe. I'm English. I've been living back in the UK now for the last 3 years in a place called Amersham, which is just outside London, very close to where I grew up as a young lad. I do some voluntary work. I serve as a trustee of a couple of charities. One is an educational trust. The other is a charity called Sat7, which is a satellite TV broadcaster. And we broadcast Christian and educational programming across the whole of the Middle East and North Africa in 3 Middle Eastern languages. I'm also actively involved through Caritas in refugee resettlement. That's through a community sponsorship scheme which the UK government operates in conjunction with the United Nations. Work-wise, most of my career has been spent in banking, primarily with HSBC, but also with a French banking group. I spent 17 years living and working in Asia, and of that, 12 was in Hong Kong and 5 down in Thailand. I actually moved down to Thailand in 1997. I was parachuted into Bangkok to be head of risk when the Asian financial crisis broke. I was very reluctant to leave Hong Kong at that time, actually, especially at such an important historic time in Hong Kong's evolution. Yeah. The idea of being dropped into Bangkok in the midst of such a severe financial crisis, and what for me was a brand new cultural environment, that was a challenge and a development opportunity that I felt I just had to take. And I'm glad I did, because I found that throughout my career, whenever I have had opportunities presented to me, if I've seized the moment, if I've stepped out of my comfort zone, I've always found it to be very, very rewarding in terms of my growth and personal development. And that was certainly the case for the Bangkok experience. Sorry as I was to leave Hong Kong in 1997. And that was nothing to do, of course, with the Hong Kong handover, but everything to do with the opportunity that lay in front of me in Thailand. Aside from banking, I've also worked in business advisory roles. Most recently with EY, that was a job I was doing until early 2017, when I came back to the UK to really concentrate on my property business. When I got back, I realised very quickly that I needed to have some kind of salaried employment to be able to get mortgages as I was growing my portfolio. So I've been doing some part-time work with the Office for National Statistics as a social survey interviewer. That has served its purpose very well. It's certainly allowed me to raise the mortgages. It's also given me some fascinating insights into what's happening in British society. So I've enjoyed doing it, and it's served a useful purpose.
And on that, Mark, I think, it served its purpose. And I think, what you've highlighted there is very much your, capacity to be, what's the word, transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Into what you want to do. And I think that's quite key with a lot of people, is they think that it's suddenly a hard stop on one life and then the other one starts, when in actual fact, like, for myself, and what you're describing there is actually what you're planning is a transition to move from one career to the other, which in your case is full-time property investing.
I think when we do our training, it's made to look very easy often. Somebody stands up and they show you some slides and they click through and they show you some pictures of a nasty, smelly old house that's very, very run down. And then they show some building works going on, and then you get a nice slide up of a beautifully presented property, and you see all these fantastic return on investment numbers. You think, I can do that. And of course, what you don't necessarily realise at the time is all the hard work that goes into it, all the challenges you're going to encounter, all the ducking and bobbing and weaving you're going to have to do to get to where you want to be. I think the important thing is to have a plan, to have a long-term goal in mind, set yourself a time frame. And then just to work persistently and resiliently towards that. You will encounter problems along the way. Things don't always move in a straight line. They don't always go as you planned. But if you just stick at it, it does work. I had a number of people I looked to through my property journey today, and I've seen how they have persevered and they're achieving great success, and they've gone from strength to strength. So your plan, work towards it. Be consistent in your actions and just persevere. Yeah,
I think it's great advice, and everybody listening, and who, I think that's definitely a very key element to this. And it's the fact that at the end of the day, that perseverance of wanting to achieve what you want to is crucial. And I think that it's not going to be a smooth transition, as and just completely upward all the time. But having that support, and I think, whether that it comes from emotional support or whether it comes from actual business support or knowledge, we are not here to know it all by ourselves. And I think that's the real key in all of that.
Yeah, always draw on the support that's around you. Coming out of, you've done your basic training, coming out of mentorship, you'll have the support of your mentor. But also look to people around you. I know in Hong Kong, I'm in some WhatsApp groups myself. There's some very active social media groups. There are people in those groups that can help. We can learn from each other's experiences. I think sometimes we can be a little bit nervous to maybe sort of share problems and admit that things haven't gone quite as we intended. But chances are other people have encountered those exact same issues, and they might actually have a problem or a solution to your problem. So in sharing the problem, seeking the advice of your peer group, you'll often find answers. You've got your mentors you can go back to. I'm very fortunate to be back in the UK. I'd done my initial training in Hong Kong. And yet when I came back, or since I've been back, I continued to do more training. I regularly attend seminars, be they networking events where I can speak to investors, events where there are speakers who are specialists in their respective fields. And I actually, pick and choose the events based on who's going to be speaking, look for areas in which I want to enhance my knowledge. The networking events are fantastic. And I would encourage everyone on the seminar, on the webinar, if they're not actually living in the UK at the moment, when they're in the UK, ahead of time, look to see what networking events are on in the areas you're going to be visiting, and try and make sure you take one in. They typically run of an evening. There's some structured content, and then there's an opportunity just to mix and mingle with other investors and talk to them. And I find them a fantastic learning opportunity.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, with all of this, you've got to find out what you enjoy. And I think that's very crucial. If some people, go down that route or not, I think there's more ways than one to skin a cat in order to get to the end goal that you want to set yourselves. And so, I think it's good advice. So, obviously there's a lot there. You've been around the world. You've done a bit of Asia, you've done a bit of Thailand. And as I say, the only time I've sort of done anything out there is for fun. We're getting some love in. And as I say, it's we're getting some love in from David. Look great for David. He's watching and learning from Sydney. I don't even know what time it is in Sydney, but all I know is that's amazing with regard to the commitment. So thank you, David. But so Mark, give us, I'm going to ask you a couple of other things to knock you off guard, and I kind of, because I know you very well now. Who's your favourite football team?
Oh,
and I'm going to tee it up. Just remember that I support Newcastle.
I'm going to cut the line if you keep saying that. Well, for me, there's only one team. That's got to be Sunderland. I'm sure a lot of people on this call know that I'm a very, very committed Sunderland fan. Sunderland till I die, as the expression goes. We've basically fallen from grace. Now in the third tier of English football, having been in the Premier League just 3 years ago. It's been a very swift and unpleasant descent. I think that the position has now stabilised. And hopefully we're on the way back. The passion and commitment of the fans is second to none. If you want to get a flavour of it, for those of you that are Netflix subscribers, there is a series running at the moment called Sunderland Till I Die. It's actually in its second season. Have a look at that. That will give you a good insight into the ups and downs and some of what we've been through.
I would like to point out to all of our UK guys that Sunderland is not the only football team here in the UK, but obviously as a passionate supporter, Mark is obviously wanting to put them first. But no, there's many other teams that people like to support.
And it's interesting, I find talking to investors, a lot of them actually look at investment areas according to Premier League football teams. So, Dan spoke last week on the webinar about the difference between Man City and Man United. I think he's Man United and his grand's Man City. And you get those rivalries, but it's a good way for people to learn British geography. Sunderland's actually a long way from where I live. It's 275 miles from where I'm sitting in my home right now to the Stadium of Light. But I've got family connections in the area. My mum's from up there, and I spent 3 years there at Durham University, which is only a few miles from Sunderland. I did an economics degree back in the 1980s. It's actually an interesting potential investment area. The yields are very high. You can get double-digit yields even on buy-to-let properties in Sunderland. Capital values are relatively low as well, so it's maybe a good point for entry-level investors. The one thing that has put me off it personally, reason it hasn't fitted my strategy, I don't think you're going to see a lot of capital growth in that area, because there's not a lot of business investment going into the northeast of England. It's a relatively rundown area. It's got historic industries around coal mining, shipbuilding. Neither of those industries are alive and kicking today, really, in the UK at least. So there's not a lot of business investment going in, and that sort of works against this whole idea of momentum investing. And by that I mean, looking to take money out every 2 or 3 years to create, as the prices rise, to create deposits to buy more properties. You're not going to see a lot of that in Sunderland and the northeast, unfortunately. But
again, with all of these areas that we teach and speak with and go through with our mentees and even invest ourselves, it's very much understanding the market dynamic, and you can't really force certain strategies in areas that don't really allow that to happen. And up in that sort of northeast area, as a general statement, it's very much cash flow orientated, and so really cash flow is king in those areas where your natural capital growth in high demand areas from people purchasing is not quite as aggressive in other major cities like a Manchester, like a London, like other major cities. So again, there's benefits relative to the strategies in the area, and I think very much so on a wider level. In my opinion, seeing it for the sort of the last sort of 10 years, people are looking for cash flow, and cash on cash is very much the driver. And so those areas like a Sunderland, like you're describing, work for that. So I appreciate your insights on that. I'm sure the guys here do as well. So another little thing that I think we want to ask is, here's the man, here's the legend, but really, what kind of, makes you tick? And I think this is, today about sort of finding a little bit about that. So if you were going to read 2 books I reckon I know one of them might be. But if you want to recommend 2 books for people to read, what would that be, and why?
I don't read a lot of fiction. When I do read, I prefer to read sports books or books that are biographies of successful people from all walks of life. Also enjoy reading a lot of business and psychology books. I'm a bit of an amateur psychologist on the quiet. I find that an absolutely fascinating subject, and actually wish that I'd done a psychology degree at some point in my life, but I've not been fortunate enough to have the time to do that. Maybe that will change in time as my property business grows. I guess in terms of the 2 books that I would recommend, the first one probably is going to come as no surprise to anybody. It's Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. That was a book that I didn't read until 2016. And it completely changed my outlook on things. I wish I'd read it many years previously. I think it's actually a great book to give to young adults to read, because if they take on board the messages and act upon them, that can transform their lives for them. I love the way that he got me to think about things differently. As somebody coming from a banking and business advisory background, I had a very traditional view around assets and liabilities and debt. I thought that assets were something you own, liabilities were something that you owe. And reading the book, I've come to look at them in a different way. In that, an asset is something which generates cash flow for you, and a liability is something that consumes cash. So that the house I'm sitting in right now, on which I still have a mortgage, I'd previously thought of that as an asset. I'm realizing now that I'm not generating any cash on the house itself. It's actually costing me money. So it's more of a liability than an asset. And coming to that realization around what is really an asset, what's a liability, that also helped to change my view and help me to differentiate between good debt and bad debt. Okay. And it made me sort of naturally help me to overcome my natural inclination to wanting to avoid debt. That's enabled me basically to be comfortable with raising these mortgages. I'm keeping to low leverage levels. I'm operating typically between 60 to 75% leverage on my properties. But I'm prepared to take on that debt, even though I'm into my 50s now. So this is a stage in life where a lot of people are looking to reduce or even eliminate debt. But I'm at a point where I'm taking on more debt. I've spoken to mortgage brokers. They're assuring me that I can have debt in place until my 90th birthday. So I'm looking to keep the portfolio leverage so I can live off the cash flow. I don't mind taking the cash out from the portfolio, because when I take cash out from the portfolio over time, that would effectively be repaying shareholder loans or borrowing. So it's not income, it's debt, so it's tax-free. And by keeping the leverage high, what I'm doing is I'm basically managing the size of my estate, so there's less for the government to gobble up in inheritance tax when I eventually pop my clogs and go to meet my maker. So it's changed my whole view of debt. So sort of managed debt is a good thing. The second book I mentioned, it's a much more obscure title and one that I wouldn't imagine is known to anybody watching this webinar. The book's actually written by a guy I met at a business networking event that I attended back in 2008 when I was a regional head of corporate banking for HSBC here in the UK. The book's called Being the Effective Leader, and it's written by a guy called Michael Nicholas. Now, it's set in the context of a business context of leading and motivating teams. But what it really focuses on is primarily the root cause of all our results, which is essentially our own minds. And this is where my sort of amateur psychology comes into play. What Michael talks about is to say that, to achieve at the highest levels, we need, it's first and foremost about leading yourself. Okay. It's about overcoming our inbuilt resistance to change. And it's about establishing collaborative relationships which allow us to succeed. Okay. And they're three key things that I've really had to address and focus on as I've been through my property journey. Our brains are really very basic, very simple. They see business as a social structure, and they respond to that in the same way. The brain responds to that in the same way as it would respond to predators, for example, or the need for food. Our instincts are very, very basic, and they revolve around this primary fight or flight type response to threats. Yeah. To be successful, we have to minimize that threat response, and we have to condition our mindsets. Okay. And what we need to do to help to overcome the challenge which our own brains are giving us every single day, we've got to create as much certainty as we can. We've got to feel that we have a degree of control over what's happening. We need to be working and interacting with people who we're seeing as friends rather than foe. We've got to work in an environment in which trust can be created. And there must be a perception of fairness in what we're doing. If we can create that kind of environment and basically manage our mindset, then we've got an environment in which we can grow and thrive and prosper. As human beings, we're naturally wired to respond, first of all, to threats. And we've got to remove those perceived threats from our environment if we're to achieve to our full potential. And as property investors, I think that mindset is absolutely critical. And the commitment to our business must come from within. It can't be taught through any number of training courses. It's a mindset thing. Now, there are mindset coaches around. In fact, we've got one within Sourcing Investments. But
yes, we do.
We can offer that coaching to people, but the commitment has to come from in. It's down to each and every one of us to manage our mindset, to overcome those fears, and just create an environment where we feel comfortable and there is no perceived threat.
Mark, we've just got a little question from one of the Facebook user groups. What's the name of that book again? The second book you mentioned for everybody?
Being the Effective Leader.
Being the Effective Leader. And who's the author?
Michael Nicholas.
Michael Nicholas. Hopefully you got that. But thanks for the question, everybody.
And a business question about leading teams, but and I read it at a time when I was leading a team of 45 people across a regional corporate banking operation, and that basically transformed my relationships with my team and did make me far more effective as a leader. We achieved some spectacular results in terms of income growth, penetration of the international opportunity. But I've taken the lessons with me because I found the teaching so powerful. I've taken those lessons with me into my property investment journey. And that's what I've tried to do in terms of establishing my network and just working with people and just, trying to get an environment where I feel comfortable.
And what I wanted to highlight there, we're talking about the mindset play. So, within the Sourcing Investments team, we've got Bonnie Marshall, who is a mindset coach predominantly, and she's also a great property investor mentor as well. So Bonnie herself we're going to be doing a webinar with Bonnie. And in actual fact, we're going to be doing with Bonnie, but also with one of her investors as well, who unbelievably has taken. Who was one of the, we know this story because obviously we were on the receiving end, but was highly nervous in even coming over to the UK, and he's come over in sort of February time, and already he's got himself where his mindset has completely changed, and it's very calculated, it's very calm. And more importantly, is understanding risk and managing that. And in actual fact, already he's had 2 offers accepted on properties which are progressing. And I think the other one of the properties was 2 days ago. So, highly important, the mindset piece. And this is why, the mentorship, the coaching, the support actually gives you that confidence. It doesn't just change by reading a book. It actually comes from hanging out with people who display that and our ability to be objective with you. Does that make sense? Rather than it just being emotional play every time. So, everybody, it's some good words of wisdom there. So what I've got is we've got quite a few questions here, Mark, and I'm going to sort of do these at the end.
Right.
I think it'll probably be a bit better. But, so yourself, what do you do in property? And I think we've got something to show everybody here, with regard to a couple of example properties. And I know you've got more than this, but these are just a couple of examples.
Okay.
And in actual fact, what just to sort of link this in is on Friday, from the webinar last week. On Friday, this coming Friday at 1 p.m, we've got a detailed investing in Manchester webinar, which is a private webinar. We already booked up. It was going to be 30 people only, and I think 30 people registered inside probably about 10 minutes after the webinar and during the webinar on last Thursday. So now we've, because of the high demand, we've expanded it to 65 places. So please, anybody, Mark's going to be on there. Dan Stafford, who's a live sourcing agent on the ground. I'm going to go into very much into the detail of locations, what's working, what's not working, how to analyze a couple of live deals. And Mark's going to be there as well as a live investor. So here's a couple, Mark. And as I say, just in sort of, a minute, just we'll get into this. But here is a couple of properties that obviously from your side are very personal. And as I say, these are a couple. Why did you do them, and who are they targeted at?
Right. Okay. Just looking at the two you've chosen there. So you've gone for the 3-bed in Salford and the 5-bed in Failsworth, both of which are in Manchester. So in terms of properties, I invest in Manchester and Warrington, and I've got a portfolio of HMOs and buy-to-lets. The one on the left, that was the first one I did. That is a 3-bed student property in Salford. I paid £94,000 for it. Invested around 40 in the refurb. And that was targeted at students on a single let. Okay. Now, the advantage of a single let, as I saw it at the time, was primarily, frankly, it was motivated by the desire to get my first mortgage under my belt. In speaking to mortgage brokers, I was aware that some lenders wouldn't want to go straight to multi-let mortgages unless you could demonstrate that you already had a portfolio of buy-to-lets. So my thinking was do it as a single let. I had under that single let, so 3 students jointly and severally liable to pay the rent. Mums and dads guarantee, so it's very safe. As a single let, I don't have to pay any of the bills. They pay all the bills, except the council tax. As being students were exempt from the council tax. So it served a purpose. It was done quickly, on schedule, on budget. It's let very well. Thankfully, Kent Reliance did give me a mortgage. They gave me a mortgage at 3.62% on the basis of a single let. And that was great because that got me up and running. You can see the numbers there. Chris just highlighted them with a red ring. So 94,000 purchase price, 49,000. That was the total in terms of the refurb, the furniture and the transaction costs. I took a mortgage of only, I think it was 65% mortgage I took initially, which meant I had 52,000 left in there. But the property is let very, very well. It was initially let out at £880 a month, and I did that for 4 months just to align it with the academic year. I then increased the rent to £1,150, sorry, £1,105 for the following academic year. And those students who were in their second year decided they wanted to take it for their third year as well. So already by October of the year before, it was let out for the following year at 1,200. They are now at the end of their third year. So they're leaving this summer, and I've got students booked up for next year at 1,290. So I've had continuous growth in the rental. I've also had good capital growth in that property. It's up for refinance in May. I'll be looking to take possibly another £20,000-25,000 out of that deal, which I can then possibly use to create a deposit for a buy-to-let property. Yeah. The return on investment, as it's a single let, it's only 11.8%. That doesn't, of course, factor in any of the capital growth, and it's that age-old debate: do you look at returns on investment solely in terms of the cash flow generation, or do you factor in any element of capital growth? My personal view is you don't factor in capital growth until you sell the property, until you actually realise the cash. But capital growth is an important consideration for me because I am a momentum investor. I want that ability every 2 or 3 years when my fixed rate interest periods come to an end. I want the ability to refinance, to take out some equity from the growth that I've achieved so that I can grow my portfolio. So it's got to snap up in terms of a return on cash investment. And I work on a minimum 10%, so that met my criteria. And it was in the area where I saw good capital growth potential.
So I think with this, and again, we've got a couple of questions, which I might actually, it's quite poignant to sort of jump in on these, Mark. So if I, sort of just put, you and me here, we've got from Tao, we've got a question here, and again, it's quite relevant. And just for everybody on this call, neither Mark or I are financial advisors, and so at the end of the day, with anything to do with raising finance, etc., you would need to talk to an FCA regulated independent finance broker, of which are available on SI very easily. We've got a couple on there who deal with international investors, local investors, to be able to get and look at the entire market. So Tao's here obviously asking what level of income, in order to get mortgages, would be dependent on your employment. In other words, shall I leave my job? And I think, from my side here, Tao, just wanted to explain this very much to you. From an investor's perspective, and investing here in the UK, with regard to your level of employment and also your income, is actually independent, because it's not related like it is in let's say, Hong Kong, in Australia, and many countries. If you're buying your own personal residential house, then that is one thing. If you are buying investment property, then that is something very different. And therefore, the lending of that investment property is based specifically on the investment property, on the income generated from the investment property, and also the valuation of the investment property. And so therefore, at the end of the day, leaving your job is, you can stay in your job and still invest, and it has no real bearing. Would you agree with that, Mark, or anything to add?
Yeah, with one caveat. You're right. The assessment is based on the cash flow performance of the property. Okay, but for a UK-based investor, now just as an aside, I spoke to David Ever this morning. He's one of the mortgage brokers I work with. He may be on, so if he is on, maybe he can sort of drop a quick response in the comments box for you there, Chris, just to add to this further. Yep. But for a UK-based investor, under the regulatory rules, if you have less than 4 properties, you need to have a minimum salary level of £25,000, and that qualifies you for consideration for mortgages. Once you've ticked that box, and it's just to make sure basically you can put a roof over your head and feed yourself, once you've ticked that box, they then consider the actual lending proposal based on the property itself rather than on your income. Once you've got a portfolio of 4 properties, okay, you no longer need to pre-qualify. All they do, they go straight to the property portfolio. Okay. Now I'm in a position now where I've got 4 HMOs. I've got another company which is a joint venture with Hong Kong investors that invests in buy-to-let properties. So I work with David on my joint venture properties because David specialises in working with companies that have non-UK resident ownership. And in terms of where I started out, I work with a different broker for the properties that are held in the company that's owned by my wife and myself. Now, I took a very conservative view, and I said I wasn't going to quit my job until I got to the level of 4 properties, and I've got them in separate companies. So I looked at them separately. Both the brokers told me I was being too conservative and that it didn't matter. As long as I had 4 in total, I would be okay. But I didn't want to take that risk. I wanted that sound financial platform before I quit my job and ventured out into the world of full-time property. Routes coming through.
I think that's some great advice. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it is very much on your individual circumstances. So therefore, what we're saying today, David Ever is from the mortgage organisation, who is one of the long-standing brokers on the SI platform, and he's my broker as well. And so when people are really good, I would highly recommend him. So you can access him through the SI platform. But key thing is understanding what your property you're looking at. If it's commercial, if it's just a buy-to-let, if it's an HMO. Your own specific circumstance. There are so many variables which are unique to your own situation that you need to be having a conversation with the broker before you make decisions. And I think that's the key point on that. But thank you.
As early as possible in the process.
What's that? Sorry?
As early as possible in the process. Your broker is very much part of your team.
Yes.
And it's important to know what you are going to be able to achieve or what the constraints might be in terms of the financing available to you.
So we've got another one again, sort of on this topic, from one of the Facebook users. Don't be shy putting your name there. But when looking for a way to serve a purpose, are there salary brackets that qualify for higher percentage lending or better interest rates, specifically when looking at HMOs?
No, not for investment mortgages. When I used the language there, it's great to see someone listening so carefully. I did say because it served a purpose. What I was specifically referring to was getting to that £25,000 qualification level. Now, because that's a relatively low level of salary, I was able to take a part-time job only, which gave me time to spend in property. But I had to get to that £25,000 level. That's what I meant by serving a purpose. Whether it had been a 25,000, 125, 225,000 per annum would have made no difference to my lending rate, because once I qualified, the assessment is based on the property and the actual lending proposition in front of the commercial lender. Yeah, no, it's really good. So again, people are listening, so really appreciate it. So keep the questions and comments coming. Please do. We're now got quite a lot of eyeballs on us, and again, people will be watching this again after the recording as well. So I'm pretty sure we've got a mechanism to capture those questions as well, which we'll get to at the end. So I think, Mark, say sort of just diversifying. We've done a couple of books and
and we've looked at what you do in property, and again, just really starting out in the general scheme of things. It's not like you've been doing this for 50 years. But the key thing is that incremental increase of challenging yourself and building it over a period of time. JVs, doing it yourself, looking at recycling capital. Does that make sense? But really, I think the key is for anybody here is doing it with your own risk appetite as the predominant factor. If you are comfortable in going down, don't just copy other people. You have to be, working it through, understanding yourself. What's your risk appetite? You're looking to have low LTVs on your property portfolio, so therefore you've got a higher cash flow. Are you therefore wanting to leverage up so you have less capital involved? So again, it's a very, very individualistic thing. And again, talking with a mentor, talking with your team, talking with the SI team. We've got the new clinic, which is for investors to ask any questions. So it's not just during the live environment. And it's very crucial. So again, very individualistic, and this is why every single journey in this sector is very, very individual. And so therefore, there isn't one size that fits all.
And give yourself alternatives as well, particularly in the present environment. I mean, we talk on training about the need to have 2 particular strategies for your property. Always make sure you give yourself flexibility. I mean, for example, something we've done, we've got a very low LTV on our house. And what we've been able to do is basically raise money against a second mortgage on the house, effectively to release equity from the house to plough that into new property investments. And I've discussed that with my wife, and what we agreed to do is that we would always make sure that money borrowed against a second mortgage, we wouldn't be wholly dependent on refinancing the properties in which we were investing in case something were to happen to the market, in case we were to get something like coronavirus. Are we still there, Chris? Yeah,
you're still here. Don't worry, we're still hearing you loud and live. Just pressing a few buttons.
Okay. So we've always made sure that we had alternative investments that we could have liquidated. We didn't want to liquidate because they were in tax-protected structures. But basically, if it had come down to something going badly wrong in property, lenders stopping lending as they did in 2008, we could have liquidated those alternative investments rather than having to sell our home. So always give yourself flexibility and don't overcommit yourself. It's all part of having a calculated, measured strategy and going step by step. Don't try to get to your end goal in the shortest possible time frame. Set a time frame which is going to be comfortable and which doesn't involve you taking unnecessary or excessive risks.
So I again, just really good words of wisdom, and I really appreciate that. And again, I just think we've got to the point where where I really wanted to ask you. One of the biggest things, we've got a lot of eyeballs from international investors. We support a lot of international investors through the mentorship program. There's a lot of eyeballs on us. I think just to give you an idea, the from my side, it's amazing to see just in a week we've had 200 people join the SI family, Facebook group. So again, that family is increasing. The collective knowledge that is there, or challenges, or whatever it may be, is just going to grow and grow and grow. And we're very excited to be part of that. But really, just without, as I say, being very simplistic for the guys and ladies that are listening. What are the things, the 3 pillars that we talked about, that from your side is what investors and investing from afar, to make that a successful journey? What are the 3 pillars that we should discuss with anybody thinking about it?
Okay, I think the first one I'd like to highlight is probably fits in the general bracket of trust and relationships. I spent a week in Hong Kong back in October, and I had a series of discussions with investors, and there was one recurrent theme that kept coming up. People were saying to me time and again, Mark, we really need someone in the UK that we can trust. Okay, there have been unfortunate actual cases where investors have lost money with rogue sourcing agents, be they sourcing agents who've taken money from investors and not done the work very well, or perhaps not even done the work at all. And this is an issue for investors. Sourcing it's not a regulated industry. And unfortunately, it's an area in which a lot of people in the UK want to get into early on when they're becoming aware of the opportunity which property presents. In fact, you go to some training programs, networking events, people are encouraged to get into sourcing as a means to generate fees, which they can then accumulate to create a deposit to buy their first property. It's an unregulated area, and there are a lot of relatively inexperienced people working in that area, and that can cause problems. Now, I know, Chris, that you established sourcing investments back in, was it 2016, 2015, 16?
15, yeah.
With a view to cleaning up the industry and establishing standards. And I think it's great that you've been doing that. I know how much you've invested in the business over the years, creating that platform. I know the very strict standards to which you hold sources, the way in which they're screened and vetted to look at their track record. I know you insist on high compliance standards in terms of registered with a redress scheme, in terms of registered with HMRC for anti-money laundering, with the ICO for data protection, and in terms of making sure they've always got current professional indemnity insurance in place. Now, those checks that you do and that platform that you create, that provides, I think, it's a tool that can give investors confidence. Okay. Now, the trust comes from the actual personal relationships, and you can't establish trust and build relationships simply by having a tool there. But I think that gives people a very, very comfortable place to start. And I would encourage people to use the portal to establish dialogue with the sources and to start to build those relationships. It's really a very straightforward way to do that. And it's not just with the sources. There's a ready-made pool of power team members on there. We've spoken already about David, who's a great guy. You can start to talk to David, let him start to understand your personal circumstances, as Chris said, was so important. Start to build those relationships. Somebody else I think you need to focus on in terms of relationships, and I think this is one that often gets overlooked, particularly in the early stages when you're excited about making investments, and that's your letting agents. Your letting agents are absolutely critical. They're the people that are going to look after your property for you. They're the people that are going to show tenants around the property. They're the people that are going to prioritize viewings of your property over other properties they've got on their books. They're the people that are going to collect your rents and maintain your property. So, start your relationships with your letting agents and develop those relationships with your letting agents. Go in to see them when you're in the UK. Take a box of donuts into the office for them. Okay, they are critically important people to you. So I think building these relationships takes time, but I think in terms of using the SI portal, I think you're doing it within a safe environment, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier about what our brains need to enable us to achieve to our highest potential. We need that safe environment where we feel supported and among friends.
And I think moving on, just sort of the trust and relationship is built up over a bit of time. Yes, and correct. And you use systems like very much SI is built for that transparency, which obviously then drives accountable behaviour from all parties concerned. But then I think one of the key things for me is it's all right saying what is trust and all the rest of it, but education and knowledge is such a key pillar. It's like, for example, me talking with a doctor and me expecting after 3 days of hanging out with him, as a doctor to be able to start doing open heart surgery. And it's just a crazy thing that people, want to bypass that education and knowledge thing. And I think that's another key pillar.
Yeah, and that was the second one I had on my list, Chris. You're reading my mind. The second one on the list was education and knowledge. You're right. It's absolutely imperative. If you don't have the required training and the knowledge, don't start. If you've not done the training, I think you're probably better off sticking to investing in off-plan new builds. Okay, and then when you've done the right training, you'll realise that's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. Okay. Yes. But get the training. Be careful. Okay, there is any amount of training out there on the internet at the moment. I think it's just ballooning at the moment as well with people in lockdown. There's more and more information, webinars, more and more on the internet. Make sure you're dealing with reputable, credible organisations, because if you get the wrong training, you're going to be making mistakes. Okay.
And just to sort of highlight that, Mark, in my mind, there's a very, very big difference between training and theory and then operational execution. And I think people need to understand that training is one thing. Learning in a classroom, learning online is one thing. But if you are not told the operational executional principles, knowledge, systems in order to go ahead and execute, then you could be taught anything just in training. And that's where I think, a lot of organizations, are not doing the operational execution. And again, without, saying too much here, Sourcing Investments was born to do the operational execution first. And then now with our, training and mentoring programs to come in the front end, it's a complete end-to-end piece, which again, doing live operational execution during the training and getting people to actually, present, their opinions to others, massively increases retention of information as well. And that's everything that we've built into our programs, right?
I think that's right. I mean, I bet so many people along the way who invested really some quite large sums of money in doing training, and then they've not carried through, they've not taken action.
Yeah.
Which is, it goes back to what I was saying about the psychology. In part, it's a fear. There's a perceived threat. There's a risk. People want to avoid that. But in part, it's down to support, which goes back to the point of surrounding yourself with friends in an environment where you can trust people. And as I said, Sourcing Investments gives you that environment in which you can go on. You do need that support. So use the learning, the training that's available to there. Work with your mentors to get that support through the operational execution. Seek out new learning and training opportunities. Invest in yourself. It really is the best investment you can ever make. Invest in yourselves. Use networking events. Learn from each other. Use your peer groups through the social media. Come to these networking events. As I mentioned, when you're in the UK, it's something I've continued to do. And my learning curve has been very, very steep. I find that
would you say, Mark, it's all right turning up and it's all right, coming on webinars, etc. But you've got to
you need to take action.
You've got to ask questions, and you've got even that first step of asking questions. And I think we'll go on that just in the next couple of minutes. But the third pillar, which I think you've voiced very, very, very much and very clearly again and again and again, is very, the transparency and visibility aspects of everything. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I came back to the UK and then really started to ramp up my portfolio. But even though I'm in the UK, I'm living just outside London. I'm investing in Manchester in the northwest. So yes, I'm doing it from a remote location. I'm not investing in my home area. Okay, I can get up in the car and I can drive up and I can be in Manchester within 3.5 hours. Okay, so it's not far to go, but I am investing remotely, so I can relate to some of these challenges that overseas investors face. And I think something again I hear constantly from people: they want transparency on what's happening. They're investing large sums of money. They want to know what's being done with it. And they want to see how their money is being used. Okay, very, very important to them. I think one thing that I would suggest investors could do is agree with sourcing agents, project managers up front what their expectations are in terms of regular reporting. I think we're seeing a different way of doing things through lockdown. People are using video conferencing, webinars, all the rest of it, much, much more. Rather than receiving a few lines on an email from a sourcing agent saying all's on track, project going well, ask them to do something differently. Can we please have at periodic intervals and agree the interval, whether it's weekly, 2 weekly, 10 days, every 10 days, whatever it might be. Can we please have a video conference? And we can do that very simply via WhatsApp or FaceTime or whatever. And just have a video tour of your property and get the agent to show you what's being done, what work is being completed. That will give you more comfort around where you're getting to in terms of the development of your project.
Couldn't agree more.
Having to authorise the release of money.
Correct. So, and again, sort of those things combined, releasing money to anybody, it's a tough thing. And I really want to, again, relate it back to, designing systems to solve problems. And SI have built the conversational area, which is to have all conversations, on record. So if anything does go wrong, it's trackable. We're just about to release an app in both Google Play and iOS app stores, so it can literally be your WhatsApp for investing on your phone to be able to have push notifications. You can send videos through it. You can receive pictures through it. And again, keeping all of this on record in case something goes wrong is absolutely imperative. So the key thing is, I think, that transparency and visibility is you've got to be transparent yourself. Does that make sense? As the investor, to ask for these things, up front and at key intervals. So therefore you receive that transparency and visibility back. Otherwise, it becomes murky. It becomes about, gut instinct. It just comes about, sheer blind faith, which are things that, for anybody, just, becomes very, very, what's the word? High risk, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the challenges we all face, not just in property, but in life in general, we never can know what we don't know.
Yeah, correct.
Just talk to people, talk to sources, talk to your power team, talk to your mentors, talk to your peers, and just find out how they're doing things, and learn from each other's best practice, and just see what's achievable. Just look at how much we've all changed and adapted over the last 3 or 4 weeks to the circumstance in which we now find ourselves. Okay, we're learning as we go. And we can do the same in our property journeys by drawing on all the resources available to us and adapting the way we do things.
So we've got, and I really appreciate that, and I'm sure everybody watching this, is really appreciating. I didn't want to, we normally do a half an hour webinar, or now it's sort of 52 minutes, but I think it's just highly valuable talking to somebody who's been through the process, and as I say, Mark, implying his skills and knowledge, as part of the SI team, mentoring as well. And I just think it's great. We talk about transparency, and that transparency that we're giving to people now is not about, about the silver bullet that's going to change your life. It's actually, giving practical advice and processes, and more importantly, where to go. Does that make sense, to actually, get over these challenges and problems? So what I'm going to do to sort of, and again, what I wanted to highlight to everybody is, you're not going to have all of these questions now. We've had a lot of questions in on the system now, which I can see, and we're going to do a couple of those in a minute. But really, what I wanted to point out to everybody is we've got, in order to solve again this problem, we've got the SI Solutions Clinic, and this is for investors predominantly. And if you ever have got a question, you go to sourcinginvestments.co.uk/promo/clinic, CLINIC. And you can ask any questions to your investing or property problems. And again, it's going to be secure. Some people I know in different cultures don't necessarily like putting their names to it, and they just like that anonymity. So again, we've designed this so you can ask those questions. So Mark, the team, the SI mentoring team, the power teams, we've all got this knowledge at our fingertips, and we can find any question. And then again, we highlight this to everybody. There are no silly questions at all. And so in actual fact, creating this private space in order to submit that question is really, where we wanted to sort of create. And just to highlight, what it is, if I take us away. Privileged to sort of set that up, and as I say,
Chris, we lost you there for a minute.
Oh dear, I didn't quite get the buttons. No, we've got the SI Clinic there, so it is live now. So please, anybody at any time, we're going to be highlighting that. So /promo/clinic, and then from those questions, we will be doing private Q&A webinars with all the people who submitted to actually deal with it on a personal one-to-one basis. So again, please submit your questions at any time, and we'll be dealing with those on a weekly basis. So please do that. Very much, I think, we're providing a solution, so please use it. So I think, really from my side, I want to say thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. And as I say, as part of the team doing the property investing yourself. And please, for anybody, I would say to please join our Facebook groups. We're going to have this kind of valuable content with Mark, with all the rest of the teams, power teams, to really give you an insight and an opportunity to ask questions. And I think before I sort of summarize, there's a couple of
Chris, put your video on.
Video.
Yeah, all I can see anyways is a black box at the moment. I can see me and I can see a black box.
No, I think it's all good. Don't you worry. I think we're all fine and dandy. So what we've got is a couple of questions which I think are very applicable. And again, we'll just put these up. So Fabrizio, appreciate it. Notice that many HMOs on sale in Sunderland. Is there any particular reason for this?
It's not an area in which I invest, Fabrizio, so I don't know the details of that particular market. But if there are many HMOs on sale, that rather implies to me that there is potentially an oversupply of HMOs in Sunderland, and people potentially have been experiencing relatively high void rates. There is a university there, so there will be demand for student property. There's not a lot of business investment in the Northeast, as I'd mentioned, so it might not be the best market in which to do high-end HMOs with en-suites for young professionals. But the fact there are HMOs coming for sale in Sunderland suggests to me there is an oversupply. People are not getting the necessary returns, and they're looking to redeploy capital elsewhere.
But again, I think as well, it's worth looking at the exact specific properties, etc., how far they are away from university. You know, I'm an HMO.
There will be student demand, yes, for sure.
For sure. So again, if you've got one that's, 50 yards away from the university's front door, that's an interesting proposition compared to something that's 3 miles away, etc. So again, it's very much property specific. And so therefore, actually talking in general terms of HMO sales in Sunderland, what areas in Sunderland, what are they targeting? What's the demographic? There is a lot of, detail that you need to, get into to understand a property and its benefits and the location. So hopefully that answers your question, Fabrizio. So we've got another question from a Facebook user. What's your view on some properties getting charged council tax per room? Would that affect HMOs going forward? I will comment on that. You just mentioned something. If you do HMOs for students, which is a demographic that lends itself very nicely to HMOs in itself, is very much around students do not pay council tax. So there is one avenue to avoid that. But the key thing is with whether it's council tax per room or you're doing an all-in-one bill solution, the key thing is for the investor to look and analyze what are the requirements with regard to the costs for operating that as an investment. So if the local council, for example, is thinking about council tax per room rates, or your demographic is young professionals, where irrespective you are responsible for the council tax as the landlord, you therefore bake that into your operating numbers, and therefore when you've done that, you can see whether it actually makes it viable or not. The key thing is it's just one part of expenses, for example, that you need to be looking in detail when you're analysing deals and making investments decisions. Anything to add, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, this council tax permit started out in Reading, and it's spreading around the country. And I understand there's been a bit of a campaign by the Valuations Office in Doncaster recently. The problem is, or the challenge for investors is that they are not applying it on a universal basis. They're basically going to individual properties and doing it one at a time. And that is creating an uneven playing field, in that some investors are having to absorb that cost and they're not able to sort of pass it on and reflect it in their room rates, because they're competing still with people who are not having to pay or having to reflect those costs in the room rates they're charging. So it's not a level playing field, which is rather unfortunate. I think it's going to be something we see more and more of. Councils have been looking to raise more funding, as over the years with austerity and government spending cuts. Councils have had their cash allocations cut. What we've seen with this new government is we have seen the purse strings loosened a bit through the last budget. There's been some quite significant injections of cash into the economy, and that's just been increased dramatically, of course, through what we're seeing with through the virus stimulus that's coming through. So hopefully some of those pressures might ease, and the councils might not need to be quite so rigorous in going forward and looking at raising money through taxing HMO rooms or HMOs on a room by room basis for council tax purposes. Yeah, it is something that will have an impact. Just reflect it in your numbers. You could look to build provision into your tenancy agreements to say that if the councils do decide to levy tax on a room by room basis, and that cost will be absorbed by the tenant. Okay, just beware, if you do that, you're potentially making your tenancy agreements non-competitive. Okay. Yeah. Chances are they might sign it without reading it. They shouldn't, but some I'm sure will sign it without reading it thoroughly. If you then try to actually apply it, if it happens, you might then find that your room rates are very, very uncompetitive when they factor in the total cost. If they're still within the 6-month initial period, tough, they might have to stay. If they move to a periodic license, you might find they're moving out a month later unless you give them some concession. It's an unknown. It's just something we have to contend with and adapt as we go along, I'm afraid.
And you know, talking about room rates, etc. We've got another question from Tao here, which again I think is probably something that we will address. We're going to be speaking about Liverpool and all the different areas of the country. So, what do you think about HMOs in Liverpool? Which is a high-level generic question. The per room rate seems to be lower than other large cities, but the overall yield seems to be high. I think really to take this one, Tao, is you know, what do we think about HMOs in Liverpool? I think, you know, HMOs work in Liverpool, again, in very specific areas. Strategies that are working there, again, whether it be for students, whether it be for blue-collar workers or any demographics that are suitable for HMOs. Again, really the analysis is where is it, and what is it servicing, and where is it servicing, and who is it servicing? And really, whether it's about room rates, and, you know, if you talked about sort of room rates, you know, in here in London, you know, you've got room rates of nearly sort of £900 a month for a room in cases. Well, relatively to renting, you know, a one-bedroom flat, which is sort of £1,200, £1,300, it's relatively cheap. So really, it's all about the capital GDV of your investment. Is it servicing a demand? Because there's no point in having an HMO in a demand-less area. And as I say, so you really need to be having a look into the specifics. You can't really talk about, you know, it's like, you know, what is property like in Hong Kong? Very, very different areas in Hong Kong. I can't really talk about it in generic terms. So therefore, you know, the devil is in the detail. But I appreciate your question on that, Tao.
It's just, I think the question essentially is just a reflection of the maths. You know, lower rental rates, but higher yields means lower capital values. So you're probably looking at in some of the less well-off areas of Liverpool. But as Chris said, it depends on the area and depends on the strategy. I was working with a Hong Kong investor recently, well, actually, that's probably about 12, 18 months ago now. She had a property that was located almost right in the middle between the Anfield and Goodison Park stadiums, so the two football stadiums in Liverpool and Everton. And of course, it was great on match days. And in fact, I had someone come to me just a month or so back saying, can I invest in serviced accommodation in Liverpool by the stadium? Well, yeah, on the face of it, it makes sense. The problem that this particular investor was finding was it wasn't being used other than around match days. So what she did in the end, she converted it back into a 4-bed HMO. And it's done very nicely as a 4-bed HMO, but it didn't work as serviced accommodation. So the key is the right strategy for the right area. Yeah,
correct. Couldn't agree more. So, you know, again, just wanted to, you know, we've got a load more questions, but we've been going on for an hour. We're going to have, again, you know, I wanted to highlight the you know, if you've got questions, whether it's now, whether it's in the next few weeks, it doesn't really matter. Any question is applicable to, you know, as long as it's relative to property and investing problems. Not going to be an agony aunt here on relationship advice, etc. But so really, you know, again, go to sourcinvestments.co.uk/promo/clinic. That's for any of you guys, whether you're watching this live, whether you're watching it after. Go to there, submit the questions. The team will be looking at it and we'll get back to you personally. And we will then combine those and do an exclusive private webinar and then schedule it in due course and let everybody who's submitting a question know. But as I say, thank you so much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
One question, sorry. On the web, just to be clear, people who submit questions, when it comes to the webinar, we're not going to disclose the name of the person who asked. We'll just say there's a question.
Correct.
So it's done completely anonymously, right?
Correct. So everybody can have the confidence in knowing that, you know, any question is applicable. It doesn't matter if it's very basic or highly advanced. The key thing is it's there to service everybody. So that's the crucial part of it. So again, we've got the webinar on, if you're interested, on Friday, which Mark is going to be a part of with Dan Stafford and myself. Getting in the if you haven't seen it before, please check out our previous webinar and live stream, which was recorded last Thursday. Check it out for a little bit of a taster. We're going to get into a lot more detail there, doing some live deal analysis and really exploring Manchester, the surrounding areas, and Greater Manchester in more detail. It's now open to only 65 places. I think we, at last count, we had nearly 52. So there's about 10, 13 places left. So please, anybody on the webinar, please now live register for it, because we're going to close the door at 65 Really appreciate it. And as I say, with any of us, thank you so much for your time. We very much want any of your questions. Remember, follow us on SI Family Group in Facebook, Sourcing Investments on YouTube channel. And as I say, please come for a free trial for Sourcing Investments at sourcinginvestments.co.uk. Come in for a free trial, and we'd love to hear from you. Any of your questions, come to the clinic. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time. We've run over, but we love it, and we could be here all day. So thank you so much. And
take care, everybody. Stay safe, be well.
Take care.
Cheers.